Welcome to the Roderick demo drawing, and in this demo we're going to be looking at Roderick. He's an kind of your typical cliched burly armored warrior guy, and he was designed to be the westernized version for an RPG game from China for the marketing art, very similar to Kami, a same game in fact. And so you see that I initially started with those 3 thumbnail drawings, and I don't have the footage of those. Each one of those took about 2 to 5 minutes, and they were basically done just to get the basic silhouette that we wanted in the marketing art down for that particular title. We went with number 3, which is this particular pose, and you can kind of see me here immediately blow up the thumbnail drawing and kind of start doing rough detailing and sort of rough refinement on top of this thumbnail. You might say, well, where are the dynamic forms? And the thing is really that I'm drawing the dynamic forms. I'm not drawing the dynamic forms, I'm imagining the dynamic forms as I'm drawing out these elements. And I must say, on this particular piece, it was kind of a time crunch to get him out quickly. And sometimes when I do need to draw very quickly, I may just forego drawing the dynamic forms, not because I'm in a bit of a rush, and rather just relying on my ability to imagine them in and draw the kind of the rough details on top of these imagined dynamic forms. Now, this doesn't always work, and a lot of the times you'll see me, probably in this demo as well, correcting elements because I didn't draw the dynamic form first, or I didn't have a solid enough grasp of what I wanted to draw on that particular element, whether it was the arm or the leg or what have you. His right hand arm, for example, and that sword, you will see undergo many changes. And let me talk about another topic while you are watching this time lapse go through, which is, the idea that you have gained a particular level of drawing skill doesn't mean every drawing you now do is going to be awesome. All right. Now, of course, you want to put only your best work in your portfolio. That's something else. But it doesn't necessarily mean that every piece you do is great. And I don't consider this piece to be one of my better works. And could have been the time crunch. Could have been that I don't think I planned it particularly well, or I fiddled with him too much. He's okay. At the end of the day, he's okay, and he got the job done, and the project continued and whatnot. But just realize as well that, like everything, just like a music artist, you may release an album, but you're only going to have, maybe 1 to 3 hits, and the rest are going to be, okay. So, only put your best work in your portfolio, but also be realistic. Not every single piece you do is going to be amazing or blow people's minds, but every piece you do is definitely always a mark of progress, right? Every piece you do is just another piece on the road to you getting better and better and better. And so here you can see me, in a sense, struggling to get that sword in, struggling to sort the arm out. And there'll be multiple proportion changes that I do through the course of this piece. And I think, again, I wanted him to be very big and burly, so I changed the size of his head to being a little bit smaller. It makes him look a lot more dominating. But at the same time, I was really messing with his overall proportions. And so this type of drawing where you see me moving a lot and moving a lot of elements and erasing, redrawing, erasing, redrawing, erasing, drawing, it's very chaotic. And sometimes you can get into a rut with this sort of thing. Like you get into a rut of drawing where just things don't feel like they're working. And to be honest with you, if I had to be very critical of myself, I would say that it's primarily improper planning at the fundamental level. That's usually what it's going to come down to. You haven't planned the fundamentals properly. And so because you haven't done that, everything's kind of like you're kind of stumbling along as you're moving through the piece, trying to make things work. And you'll see I do multiple armor designs and multiple detail changes on the piece, and things just don't seem to work. But it does fortunately come together at the end of the day. And the real world does tie into your work sometimes too, where there's a time crunch, you need to get the job done, do the best you can in the time you have. That's all you can do, and just get on with it. So that's what I did at that stage. And I do think, if I wasn't on such a time crunch, I would have planned it a little bit better. So here I've used some cues from the original character design, which is a very chibi look, mainly the helmet, which in fact didn't really end up being so good in the final. That's probably why you've never seen the actual posted final. I wasn't really proud of it, but as for a drawing demo, this certainly is a demo of how things can go, and also does follow the general processes. Particularly here, we're working the rough stage, And you can see that I'm trying to figure out the details of this particular character. How does the armor look particularly? Now, if you've seen my work, you might notice that I don't really draw that many guys, and it's something I definitely want to work on. I want to draw more guys. And also, I don't draw much armor. I don't think I had drawn medieval armor prior to this point. So I was kind of really struggling along, and definitely I think I would have appreciated time to have gotten more research in armor designs, how armor fits together. I really winged this like crazy. Nevertheless, you see me doing a few checks there. I did a few checks just now, and it's the same checks that we've learned in Module 6, those 5 crucial elements of posing. And of course, also thinking here about the hand position, the head position, the tilts. And perhaps by now, you're probably recognizing a particular pattern in the demos you've seen this far. Not all demos, of course, but the demos you've likely seen this far, in that the head angle, the shoulder angle, and the pelvis angle are generally always at a tilt. Sometimes it can be a similar tilt. Sometimes it's a different tilt. But the key thing is, remember these tilts. Try to avoid parallels. It's not the end of the world if you have a head parallel to the shoulders, or perhaps the shoulders parallel to the pelvis, but try then to add in additional overlapping objects or additional foreshortening, etc., etc. Because you want to get that varied and that dynamic look in your work. At the same time, try to make sure that you are not doing the same tilts on every single piece, in which I do feel that when you look at Chrono Viper, you look at Carmi, you look at Roderick, they tend to have a similar vibe to them. And I think in this instance, more rotations are needed amongst this variety of work, so that perhaps Roderick could have been looking the other way, helping the tilt to be opposite, right? So always think about ways, even in your work, try not to have too many symbolic repeating patterns in your work either, because to viewers of your portfolio, viewers of your work, they might start to feel, well, everything looks samey. They might not know why it looks samey, right? They might feel that things looking samey. It could be that your tilts are repeating in every single piece. So be very aware of that. And so here I'm going into slightly more of a refined rough. There I'm adjusting his head to change his proportions. I'm using these digital tools, the selection tools and stuff, to move things around. And I want to get this rough to a point where I'm confident that when I draw over it, it's going to look reasonably okay. And at this point, he's quite chunky in the rough, but I start moving directly into doing the drawing of the drawing, or the clean, the refined phase, the clean lines phase. Here I was pretty intentional to make sure that his helmet showed multiple sides, which was a little bit tricky to draw out of my head, but it just came out pretty okay. And I just do think that the proportions of his head were just a little bit too weird. If you consider the top height of the helmet going to the bottom of the chin, his eyes just seem too low. Now in the final piece, this was corrected in the final painted work. It was corrected and it looks okay. And it's not super noticeable in the line art. I mean, you could argue that there's padding in there, or he's got a lot of hair in there or something like that. But, and you can see there already, there's the sense that I've felt that something was a little strange, and so I had adjusted the eyes. But as we move into the cleanup phase, it's nothing you haven't seen. Very similar to Carmi, depending if you've watched the Carmi video before this or you're watching this one first. Technically, she should be first because she's C and he starts with R. But nevertheless, because he is being drawn to be painted over, not 100% painted over, mostly painted over, that the lines aren't that noticeable, I use a very thin line. In this instance, I'm using a 2-point line, and all the basic lines are being done first. Speaking about workflow as I go through this, usually when there is a crunch, when there is a time crunch, it's a very good idea to just stick to a workflow so that you can work logically through the work very quickly. So in this instance, I certainly did do all the lines first, unlike Chrono Viper, where I did a little bit of line weighting here and there while I was doing just the basic line phase. Here it was really get the lines down, get the piece done, then do the line weighting afterwards, and then, wipe my hands clean of it, then we'll do painting another time or whatever. So when you're working on the rough, remember that it's that time to be free creatively. You can think of new designs, think of new things that you'd like to do on the character itself, change up things, add extra sides to objects. You know, just takes another line to add another side to something. Resize things, move things, change things, get it looking as good as possible, right? Do everything you can while you're working on a stage. You don't want to revisit the piece 50 times and do multiple post edits after you're already done. It just makes the piece look overworked. And so what I'm doing there on that leg is I initially wanted to have the same armor design on both, but here is an example of where I was thinking of both symbolic and also shape symmetry. And I didn't want any symmetry, I wanted asymmetry. So I designed a completely separate shaped armor on his right leg so that the left and the right leg's armor, even though they were the left and right legs were at different twisted angles, I wanted the armor itself to look different to break the symmetry to the viewer so that the legs weren't just a dull part. And also, I was actually sneakily adding the points on the top of the armor to kind of drive the viewer's eyes back up to the focal point, which was the head. Just looking at his arm there, quite a bit of anatomical knowledge. It's not 100% anatomically correct, but it takes quite a bit of understanding of how the muscles plug into one another. And again, I just want to reinforce how important it is for you to just do your anatomy studies following the anatomy study plan. You know, you can watch anatomy videos or whatever, but no one can really teach you to be good at anatomy. You have to learn it. You have to learn it off by heart by yourself, right? People can give you tips, you know, tips to learning anatomy. But learning anatomy is not really drawing, right? Learning anatomy is learning anatomy. Doctors have to learn anatomy. You know, vets have to learn anatomy. Artists have to learn anatomy. It's one of those things. So learn the anatomy. It really is worth it. And it's just an amazing tool in your pocket when you have got it down. And at this point, I'm being very careful to make sure that the perspective of the blade is reasonably okay, right? It looks reasonably right. But rather, when we're talking about character drawing, a lot of the times we're working at a very shallow field of view or a shallow cone of vision. So a lot of the times you're not having extreme perspective effects happening. You're having kind of basic perspective effects happening. That's not to say that perspective isn't useful in character drawing either. What I'm trying to say is that you want to use basic logic. Things that are closer to us are bigger. Things that are moving away from us are smaller, right? As things go back into space, they narrow and recede, right? Just the basic stuff of how we see. I don't think I made any major adjustments to the sword as I was working on the piece. I just felt that because of its awkward shape, which was inferred somewhat from the original chibi style work of the game, that it kind of implied the kind of space that it was taking up reasonably fine. And plus I also used the slight foreshortening of the hilt to kind of really sell the perspective angle of the piece. And as we near the end of this demo, you will see me moving into line weighting and just making a few adjustments here and there. And that is pretty much the end of this demo. I will see you in the next demo. Please feel free to watch the full-length version of this demo. Have a good one.